Princess Silara of the Zyrithi Empire stood on the balcony, her sharp eyes watching the great arena below. Today was supposed to be another typical royal inspection, but there was something different in the air. A new challenge had come to the Empire, the taming of the Void Mauler, the galaxy's most dangerous creature. It was said that no one, not even the fiercest warriors or the most powerful beings, could tame one of these beasts. They were creatures of darkness and fear, powerful and wild. Most who tried were never seen again. The crowds filled the stands below, eager for the spectacle. The Zyrithi were a proud and warlike species, and they loved to see power on display. Princess Silara had been trained to be just like them. Strong, fierce, and unshakable. She had watched many gladiators face deadly creatures, but nothing had ever excited her like this. Today, the Emperor himself had promised that they would see something truly remarkable. As she looked down, Silara's eyes narrowed when she saw the human entering the arena. He was a stranger to her, a Terran who had wandered into the Empire years ago, lost and stranded. The Emperor had brought him here, not because he was powerful or important, but because he had somehow survived living in the dangerous wilderness of the outer colonies, and now, this human had claimed he could tame the Void Mauler. Silara shook her head in disbelief. How could anyone think that a human could tame such a beast? The Zyrithi believed that only those with power, those born with strength, could control such wild forces. But the human, Dax Carter, had no such strength. He was smaller than most of the warriors in the Empire, and his skin was pale. He looked like nothing more than a traveler. Yet here he was, walking towards the beast as if he had every right to. The Void Mauler was chained to a large pillar in the center of the arena. It was a terrifying sight, its body a swirling mass of shadows, with glowing red eyes that seemed to pierce the very soul of anyone who looked at it. It snarled and growled, clearly enraged at being kept in captivity. The crowd fell silent as Dax stepped forward, unarmed and with only his calm demeanor as his weapon. Silara stood taller now, her eyes glued to the scene. She had seen warriors fight beasts before, but they always carried weapons, armor, and their arrogance. This human, however, had nothing but his bare hands and confidence. As he neared the Void Mauler, the beast's growl grew louder, its claws tearing into the ground, ready to strike. But then something unexpected happened. The human stopped in front of the Void Mauler and simply looked at it. There was no fear in his eyes, no hesitation. He seemed calm. He extended his hand slowly, and the Void Mauler stopped its growling. The audience gasped in disbelief. Silara's heart pounded in her chest. Could this be real? Could this human truly be doing what no one else had ever done? The Void Mauler, this creature, feared across the galaxy, was listening to him. Princess Silara could hardly believe what she was seeing. The human, Dax Carter, stood before the Void Mauler, his hand still outstretched. The creature, which had just moments ago been snarling and clawing at the ground, now seemed to settle. The shadows that made up its body rippled like calm waves. Its glowing red eyes no longer burned with fury. They watched Dax, almost as if it were listening. The crowd, too, was stunned into silence. The Zyrithi warriors in the stands, who were accustomed to seeing strength and power displayed in blood and violence, now found themselves unsure of what to make of this strange human. Dax didn't look like a powerful warrior. He didn't wear the heavy armor or carry the gleaming weapons that were typical of those who tamed the wildest beasts. He was just a man, and yet the Void Mauler was obeying him. Princess Silara leaned forward, her sharp eyes locked on the human. Dax Carter had an air of calmness about him that was almost unnatural. He didn't seem scared. He didn't even seem nervous. The tension that hung in the air seemed to melt away whenever he was near the creature. Silara had heard of warriors with a special connection to beasts, but this was something different. The way Dax moved, the way he held himself, it was as if he could communicate with the Void Mauler without words. The creature's glowing eyes flickered, and it took a single slow step forward. Silara held her breath, watching as the human didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled. Dax spoke softly to the Void Mauler, and though the words were too quiet for anyone to hear, there was no mistaking the way the creature responded. It sat back on its haunches, its body language shifting from hostile to relaxed. The crowd gasped, but Silara felt a strange feeling stir inside her, a mix of admiration and fear. She had heard rumors about humans. They were strange beings, known for their unpredictability. They didn't have the long lives or the physical strength of many other species in the galaxy. But humans were resilient. They were survivors, and that resilience often took forms that the other species of the galaxy couldn't understand. Dax Carter's story was no different. He wasn't born into power or wealth. He wasn't part of any great warrior caste. He was simply a stranded Terran who had somehow managed to survive in the harshest conditions the galaxy could offer. And now he had done the impossible. He had tamed the Void Mauler. As Silara observed him more closely, she could see it. Dax wasn't using force or tricks. He wasn't intimidating the beast. He was earning its trust. The Void Mauler, a creature feared by all, had chosen to follow him. And that was what frightened Silara the most. The understanding that if Dax could tame this beast, perhaps there were things he could tame that no one had ever dreamed possible. "Who are you?" she whispered to herself, wondering if this human was more than just a survivor. Perhaps he was something greater, something that would change the fate of the Sci-Fi Empire forever. Dax turned his head, as if sensing her gaze. He met her eyes across the arena, and for a moment, the weight of the moment hung between them. There was no arrogance in his look, no challenge, just a quiet understanding, as if he had already won. Silara's heart skipped a beat. This human was about to change everything. The atmosphere in the palace was thick with tension. Princess Silara stood in the grand hall, her mind racing. The day had taken an unexpected turn. What had started as a simple royal inspection had now become something much more serious. Her father, Emperor Varkan, had watched Dax Carter's performance in the arena with a mixture of anger and fear. He didn't like the idea of a human, someone so small, so insignificant in the eyes of the galaxy, gaining such influence, and yet what Dax had done could not be denied. The Emperor had ordered Dax's immediate transport to the Imperial Palace after the display with the Void Mauler. Now, in the Grand Meeting Hall, Dax stood before the Emperor, his calm demeanor unchanged. Emperor Varkan, sitting on his massive throne, eyed the human with a cold gaze. He had ruled the Sci-Fi Empire for decades, and in all that time, no one had ever dared challenge his authority. Until now. "So this is the human who thinks he can tame a beast," Emperor Varkan's voice echoed through the hall. It was deep, powerful, and laced with authority. "You've done something impressive, but that means little in my empire. You do not belong here." Dax stood tall, his posture confident but respectful. He didn't flinch at the Emperor's harsh tone. "I'm not here to take over your empire, Your Majesty," Dax said, his voice steady. "I'm just here to prove that things don't always have to be done with power and force. Sometimes, understanding is all it takes." Silara, standing by her father's side, was puzzled. She had never heard anyone speak to the Emperor like this before. Most beings in the galaxy would have groveled at the Emperor's feet, desperate to please him. But Dax, the human, wasn't like that. He wasn't afraid, and it unnerved her. The Emperor's gaze narrowed. "You speak of understanding, but understanding does not win wars. It does not control a galaxy." He paused, his eyes glinting with a dangerous gleam. "If you truly believe you can tame what others cannot, then prove it. There is a real test for you, human." Dax raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. The Emperor stood, his dark robe flowing as he descended from the throne. "You'll face more than just a Void Mauler. You will fight 3 of my best warlords, each one more skilled than any warrior you've faced. You will ride the Void Mauler, and you will win, or you will die." Only then will I consider whether you truly have what it takes to remain in my empire." The challenge was clear. It was a test of strength, of skill, and of survival. There would be no mercy. If Dax failed, he would be destroyed, and the Emperor's power would be solidified once again. Princess Stellara's heart raced. She knew her father's challenges were not to be taken lightly. But something inside her couldn't shake the feeling that this human, Dax Carter, was different. He had tamed the Void Mauler, something no one else had ever done. Could he really defeat 3 of the Empire's finest warriors? She caught Dax's gaze. His face remained calm, but she saw the determination in his eyes. He wasn't afraid. He didn't back down. "I'll accept your challenge," Dax said, his voice unwavering. "But I won't fight with fear. I'll fight with understanding." The Emperor's lips curled into a small, almost amused smile. "Then we shall see, human. We shall see." Celera felt a strange mix of admiration and worry. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew this challenge would change everything, for better or for worse. The day of the challenge arrived faster than Celera had anticipated. The grand arena was packed with spectators, all eagerly waiting to witness the spectacle. The sky above was dark with clouds, casting a shadow over the scene below. The air was filled with the sounds of the crowd, loud cheers, excited shouts, and the clang of weapons being tested by the warriors who were preparing for the battle. Celera stood in the royal box, her eyes locked on the arena below. The Emperor was by her side, his expression cold and unreadable. His gaze never left Dax Carter, who was preparing for the fight of his life. The challenge had been clear. Dax would face 3 of the Empire's fiercest warlords, each one a master of combat. The warlords had trained their entire lives for moments like this, and now they would face a human who had tamed the galaxy's most dangerous creature, the Void Mauler. Dax, standing near the edge of the arena with his Void Mauler by his side, looked every bit the outsider. His clothes were simple, made for travel, and he wore no armor or weapons. He didn't need them. He had his calm and his bond with the Void Mauler, the creature that now sat by his side, watching the battlefield with keen eyes. Celera couldn't help but wonder again how this human had done it. How had he tamed that beast? The Void Mauler, a creature of darkness and pure fury, should have ripped him apart by now. But it hadn't. It had listened to him. The first of the warlords stepped forward, a massive figure in heavy armor. His name was Karish, and he was known for his brutal strength. He carried a massive plasma hammer, capable of crushing bones with a single swing. Karish raised his weapon to the crowd, and the arena erupted with cheers. He was a living legend among the Zyrethi. Dax didn't flinch. He stood calmly, watching Karish closely, his eyes never leaving the warrior. The Void Mauler growled softly beside him, but remained still, waiting for its master's command. The second warlord, Arin, was faster and more agile. He carried a pair of glowing energy blades, his body wrapped in light armor that allowed for maximum mobility. He was a master of speed, able to strike faster than most could react. The third, Drax, was a tactical genius. He carried a long-range energy rifle and was known for using his enemies' weaknesses against them. He was not as physically imposing as the other 2, but his mind was sharp, and his strategy was deadly. As the battle began, Celera watched with a mixture of curiosity and fear. The 3 warlords immediately charged at Dax, their weapons raised high. Karish swung his hammer with deadly force, aiming for Dax's head, while Arin dashed forward, trying to circle around him. Drax, keeping his distance, aimed his rifle at Dax's chest. Dax's movements were smooth, almost effortless. He sidestepped Karish's hammer with ease, his hand raised in a gesture that made the Void Mauler leap into action. The creature's massive claws slashed at Karish, forcing him back. Arin was quick, but Dax was quicker. With a twist, he dodged Arin's blades and gave a signal. The Void Mauler lunged at Arin, knocking the warrior to the ground. The crowd gasped, stunned by the power and speed of the attack. Drax fired his rifle, but Dax, anticipating the move, ducked just in time. The Void Mauler leaped forward, blocking the shot with its massive body. The battle had only just begun, and already the tide was turning in Dax's favor. Silara's heart raced as she watched. Could this human really defeat all three of the Empire's greatest warriors? Could the impossible actually happen? It seemed that Dax Carter was not just a survivor. He was a fighter, and not just any fighter. He was something else entirely. The battle in the arena had become a blur of movement, energy, and tension. Dax Carter, the human outsider, stood at the center, surrounded by the three most feared warlords of the Zyrithia Empire. Each one had their own style of combat, each one dangerous in their own right. But none of them had expected this human to be so skilled. To their shock, Dax was not only surviving, he was winning. The Void Mauler, the dark beast that had once been a terrifying symbol of fear across the galaxy, was now a trusted ally to this human. Every movement Dax made was perfectly coordinated with the creature, each one supporting the other in a way that seemed almost natural. The creature moved with precision, its claws striking and blocking attacks with the skill of a trained warrior. Dax's calmness, his ability to read the situation, was something that the warlords had not anticipated. Karish, the first warlord, grunted in frustration. His massive hammer had missed Dax for the third time in a row. He swung it with all his strength, but Dax dodged easily, his body flowing with the grace of someone who had spent years studying the art of evasion. Karish roared in anger and swung again, but this time he wasn't fast enough. Dax moved quickly, sidestepping the blow and getting behind Karish. In one swift motion, he raised his hand, signaling the Void Mauler to strike. The creature's claws slashed through the air, and Karish was forced to step back, barely avoiding the attack. Dax, ever calm, did not waste this opportunity. He moved in with a quick, powerful strike, landing a solid punch to Karish's side. The crowd gasped. No one had ever managed to land a blow on Karish, let alone push him back. But Dax had done it. He wasn't just surviving, he was dominating. Arin, the second warlord, was next. He moved faster than the eye could follow, his glowing energy blades flashing with deadly intent. He attempted to circle Dax, trying to overwhelm him with speed, but Dax was always one step ahead. His eyes never left Arin, and in one fluid movement, he countered an incoming strike, using the Void Mauler to block it. Arin growled in frustration and attempted a feint, trying to confuse Dax with a sudden shift in direction. But Dax wasn't fooled. He knew exactly where Arin would be. With perfect timing, he caught Arin's blade with a precise strike of his own. The warrior stumbled, and before he could recover, the Void Mauler was on him, its massive claws swiping at Arin's legs. Arin was forced to leap back, his feet leaving the ground just in time to avoid the beast's strike. Drax, the third and final warlord, observed the situation from a distance. He was a strategist, not a brawler like the others. He knew how to use the environment to his advantage, and his mind was always calculating the next move. But even Drax was starting to question everything he knew. He had seen the Void Mauler tear through enemies before, but now it was being controlled, directed, and by a human. Dax was different. He was calm, confident, and most importantly, he understood the beast, perhaps even more than the warlords themselves. Drax fired his rifle from a distance, aiming for Dax's chest, but Dax was quick. The Void Mauler moved into position, blocking the shot with its massive body. Dax didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, a quiet, almost knowing smile. Silara watched from the royal box, her heart racing. She had never seen anything like this before. Dax Carter was proving himself to be something more than just a survivor. He was changing the rules of the game. Could he really defeat all three warlords? Could a human truly overcome the Empire's finest? Silara wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. The arena was no longer just a place for blood and death. It had become a stage for the impossible to unfold. The battle raged on, and the tension in the arena was so thick, you could almost taste it. Dax Carter had proven time and time again that he wasn't just any ordinary human. He had already defeated Karish and Erin, two of the fiercest warriors in the Zyrithi Empire. And now only Drax, the tactical genius, remained. The crowd was on the edge of their seats, stunned into silence. Could this human truly defeat them all? Drax stood apart from the rest, watching Dax and the Void Mauler carefully. He was no fool. He knew that brute strength wouldn't work here. Dax wasn't like the other opponents he had faced. He wasn't fast like Erin or strong like Karish. Instead, Dax was smart, and it was that intelligence that had allowed him to survive thus far. Drax needed a different strategy. With a sudden movement, Drax activated his energy rifle, taking a shot from a distance. The blast flew towards Dax, but the Void Mauler was already in motion, stepping forward to intercept the attack. The energy beam hit the creature's side, but instead of crumbling, the Void Mauler absorbed the blast, its body shimmering as it adapted to the energy. Dax watched the beast closely, signaling it to step back as he readied himself. He knew this would be different. Drax wasn't going to fight like the others. Drax was a thinker, and Dax needed to stay one step ahead. The Void Mauler growled, its eyes glowing with a fierce intensity. It was no longer just a creature of rage. It had become an extension of Dax, his partner in battle. Drax fired again, trying to catch Dax off guard. But this time, Dax was ready. He had learned Drax's pattern, and with a quick movement, he ducked just as the shot flew past him. The energy blast hit the ground, causing a small explosion, but Dax was already moving. He sprinted toward Drax, his eyes locked on the warlord. The Void Mauler followed, its massive form charging in behind him. Drax tried to reposition, but Dax was faster. With a quick sidestep, he was already in range. He reached out, grabbing the rifle from Drax's hands in a swift, fluid motion. Before Drax could react, Dax's foot kicked him to the ground, knocking the wind out of him. The crowd gasped, amazed at how easily Dax had disarmed and overpowered Drax. But Dax wasn't done. He raised his hand, signaling the Void Mauler to stop. The beast paused, its glowing eyes fixed on Drax. For a moment, the arena was silent, and the warlord looked up at Dax, confused. What was the human going to do? Dax knelt down beside Drax, his voice soft but steady. "You don't need to fight anymore," he said. "You've lost. The Empire is changing. This doesn't have to be about power and control anymore. We can all survive together." Drax's eyes narrowed, his chest rising and falling with each breath. The words seemed strange to him, foreign. Zyrithi had never been a peaceful people. They had ruled through strength, through fear. But something in Dax's words, something about his calmness, made Drax hesitate. The crowd watched, unsure of what would happen next. The battle had been fierce, but now it seemed like something else was unfolding. Was Dax Carter truly different? Was he more than just a human who had survived the impossible? Celera watched from the royal box, her mind racing. She had seen many battles in her life, but this one was like no other. Dax wasn't fighting to kill, he was fighting for understanding. The way he had tamed the Void Mauler, the way he moved in battle, it wasn't just about winning. It was about something much deeper. Drax slowly stood, looking at Dax with a mixture of respect and confusion. The human had shown him something he had never expected. And for the first time, Drax wasn't sure if strength was the answer anymore. The arena waited for the final decision. Would the warlord accept defeat? Would the Empire change with the actions of one human? No one could say, but the outcome of this battle would echo across the stars. The arena was still, the air heavy with silence. Dax Carter stood tall, his eyes fixed on Drax, the last warlord to remain standing. The battle had reached its peak, and yet it wasn't just a physical fight anymore. It had become a battle of wills, a test of ideals. Dax had defeated Karish and Erin with ease, But now, in front of Drax, the final warlord, the tension was palpable. Drax had been the Empire's greatest tactician, a brilliant mind who had commanded countless victories. But now, standing before this human who had tamed the Void Mauler, Drax was uncertain. The warlord had fought with strength, speed, and intellect, but Dax was unlike any opponent he had ever faced. Dax didn't fight with the brutal force of Zyrethi warriors. He fought with understanding, patience, and a quiet confidence that seemed to disarm his opponents as much as his strikes. The crowd was hushed. Silara, watching from the royal box, couldn't take her eyes off Dax. She had always believed in the old ways, the ways of power, strength, and dominance. The Zyrethi Empire had been built on these principles. But watching Dax, seeing the way he had controlled the Void Mauler and defeated two of the Empire's finest warriors, something deep inside her stirred. Was this human truly the future? Drax's chest heaved with frustration. He had never been forced into such a position before. The human had shown him something he had never considered: mercy. Dax hadn't killed anyone. He hadn't even shown malice in his attacks. He had simply fought to prove something. To prove that strength wasn't the only path to victory. That there was another way. "I fought for the Empire all my life," Drax said, his voice low but steady. "I've led wars, commanded legions. I've crushed my enemies without mercy." He looked up at Dax, his eyes narrowing. "And yet, I've never faced an enemy like you." Dax didn't respond immediately. He only nodded, his expression calm, waiting for Drax to continue. The Void Mauler stood behind him, its glowing eyes watching the warlord closely, as if sensing the shift in the air. "You're different," Drax continued, his tone filled with reluctant respect. "You fight with something, more than just power. What is it that drives you?" Dax took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. "I fight for understanding. For the belief that we don't have to destroy everything to survive. We can build something better. We can change the future. And that's what I'm offering. To the Empire. To all of us." For a long moment, Drax said nothing. His hands were clenched into fists, but the anger that had once burned in him now seemed to fade, replaced by something else: doubt. The crowd remained quiet, waiting for the warlord's response. Silara's heart raced. She had never heard such words from anyone, let alone a human. Could this truly be the change the Empire needed? Could Dax's message take root in a society built on strength and fear? Drax slowly lowered his head, his shoulders sagging slightly. He had spent his entire life in service to the Empire, a life that had been defined by conquest. But now, standing before this human, he felt something stir within him, a realization that maybe there was more to life than victory in battle. Maybe there was a different way. I don't know if I can accept your offer," Drax said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I will not stand in your way. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps it is time for a change." Dax's expression softened, and he extended a hand toward Drax. It was a simple gesture, but it carried weight. Drax stared at the hand for a long moment before slowly reaching out and accepting it. The arena erupted in cheers. The crowd had witnessed something extraordinary. The last of the warlords had surrendered not to Dax's strength, but to his vision. The battle was over, but the true challenge was just beginning. Silara's heart beat faster as she watched the exchange. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: the Empire was changing. And it was all because of one human's belief that things didn't have to stay the same. The arena was no longer filled with the sounds of battle. The crowd had erupted into applause, but it wasn't just for the spectacle of the fight. It was for the unexpected ending, the new hope that Dax Carter had brought to the Zyrethi Empire. Silara watched from the royal box, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had seen countless battles, watched warriors fight for glory, for power. But this was something different. Dax had not only defeated the greatest warlords, but he had done something more. He had opened a door to a new future, one where the empire could change, evolve, and perhaps find peace. Drax, the last warlord, stood beside Dax, still processing the events that had just unfolded. His mind, once sharp and calculating, now seemed clouded with confusion. But there was something else, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He had been a soldier for most of his life, fighting for the Empire's expansion and its glory. Yet here he was, on the edge of something completely new. Dax had shown him that there was a different kind of strength. The kind that didn't rely on war or conquest, but on understanding and compassion. Could that truly work? Dax turned to Drax, his face calm, his voice steady. "You're free now. All of you are. The Empire doesn't have to be built on bloodshed anymore. We can change it, together." Drax didn't speak at first. He looked down at the ground, his mind racing. Could he really walk away from everything he had known? Could he turn his back on the Empire, on everything he had fought for? The answer wasn't clear, but one thing was. Dax believed in something that Drax had never fully considered. And that belief, it had the power to change everything. Behind them, the Void Mauler growled softly, its enormous form standing guard. It was no longer the terrifying, uncontrollable beast that had once struck fear into the hearts of so many. It was now a symbol of what could be achieved when control and trust were combined. Dax looked out toward the crowd, his eyes scanning the sea of faces. They were still cheering, still uncertain about the implications of what had just happened. But Dax knew this was only the beginning. He had done more than defeat 3 warriors. He had shown the Zyrithi people that there was another path. One that didn't require endless war, that didn't demand the destruction of those who were different. Scylla stood, her thoughts racing. She had spent her entire life believing in the strength of the Empire, in its power over the galaxy. But now, before her, was a human who had proven that strength wasn't the only way. She had seen the warlords fall, not just in battle, but in spirit. She had watched Drax, the greatest tactician, soften under Dax's words, and she had heard Drax admit that perhaps the old ways were no longer enough. Scylla's heart pounded. Could she be the one to help bring about this change? Could she, as the future ruler of the Zyrithi Empire, embrace this new vision? The thought scared her. It wasn't easy to turn away from everything she had been taught, from everything her people had believed in for centuries. But Dax was right. The Empire needed to evolve, to grow, or it would continue to fall into cycles of destruction. "I'll help you," she whispered to herself, though no one could hear. "I'll help you change this." As the cheers from the crowd slowly began to fade, Dax stepped forward, raising his hand to quiet them. His voice echoed across the arena, strong and sure. "Today is not just about victory. It is about the beginning of something new, something better. A future where we can all stand together, no matter our differences. The Zyrithi Empire does not have to rule with fear anymore. We can rule with strength, yes, but also with wisdom, with compassion." The crowd was silent, uncertain of what they were hearing. But there were a few voices, small at first, that began to chant his words. The sound grew louder, and soon the entire arena was filled with the chant of change, change, change. Dax smiled, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. He wasn't just a fighter anymore. He was a leader, and the path ahead was full of challenges. But he was no longer alone. Scylla stood in the royal box, her heart swelling with a new sense of purpose. The battle was over, but the real work was just beginning. The Empire's new dawn had begun. The days that followed the arena's dramatic turn were filled with both uncertainty and hope. The Zyrithi Empire was a massive, complex system, with countless worlds and millions of citizens, each with their own beliefs and traditions. Dax Carter had done something extraordinary by defeating the 3 warlords, but that victory alone wasn't enough. The real challenge lay ahead. Change. Real, lasting change. Scylla stood in the council hall, her fingers tracing the edge of the large stone table, It had been weeks since the battle in the arena, and yet she could still feel the weight of that moment. Dax had defeated the warlords, yes, but he had also opened her eyes to something she had never considered: a different way of ruling, a different way of leading the empire. The old ways, built on war and domination, were no longer enough. But could anyone, truly embrace this new vision? Dax entered the room, his presence quiet but undeniable. He had become a figure of change, the symbol of the Empire's new future. The Void Mauler, once feared across the galaxy, now stood silently beside him, a silent protector, a testament to the possibilities of understanding over fear. Silara looked at him, her brow furrowed. "I have called this meeting to discuss the future of the Empire," she began, her voice steady but still filled with uncertainty. "What we do next will decide everything. We cannot go back to the way things were." Dax nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I know, but the first step is understanding. The Empire is full of different people, different species. We can't force them all to follow the same rules, but we can start by listening to them. By creating a council that includes everyone. We need leaders who care about their people, not just about power." The council hall was filled with representatives from all parts of the Empire: warriors, politicians, civilians, and even scientists. They were all looking at Dax and Silara, unsure of what to expect. The warlords had been symbols of strength, but Dax had proven that there was another way. Would they listen to him? Would they accept the changes he was suggesting? One of the older council members, a seasoned warlord named General Theric, stood up. "You speak of change, Carter, but what guarantee do we have that this will not weaken us?" His voice was harsh, the same kind of voice that had led many battles. The Zyrithi Empire has ruled with strength for centuries. To change now would be a risk. We cannot afford to show weakness. Dax's gaze didn't waver. "You call it weakness, but I call it strength. Strength in unity. Strength in diversity. The Empire has never truly been united. It has been divided by greed, by fear, by power. It's time to stop ruling with fear. We need to rule with understanding." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. General Theric crossed his arms, clearly skeptical, but even he could not deny the truth in Dax's words. The Empire had been built on domination, yes, but the galaxy had changed. The people had changed. And now, they had to change too. Silara stood up and stepped toward the center of the room. "I've spent my entire life believing in the old ways," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "But Dax is right. We can't continue down the same path. We must find new ways to connect with our people, to understand their needs, their desires. Only then can we create a lasting peace." A murmur rippled through the room. There was still resistance, but Silara could see the change starting to take root. The seeds of a new empire were being planted. Slowly, but surely, the council members began to speak, offering their thoughts, their fears, their hopes. It wasn't easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but Silara knew that this was the path to a future that could be better, for everyone. Dax turned to her, a quiet smile on his face. "We've taken the first step, Silara. Now we just have to keep walking it." Silara nodded. She didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, she felt hope. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but it was the only road worth taking. The day had finally arrived. The Zyrithi Empire, once ruled by fear and power, was on the brink of something entirely new. Dax Carter stood at the front of the Grand Palace, watching as the citizens of the Empire gathered before him. This was the moment of truth. The work had begun with the Council, the plans for change already set in motion. But now, the rest of the galaxy needed to see that the Zyrithi were truly ready for this new path. Silara stood beside him, her eyes scanning the crowd. The people were not yet fully convinced. They had seen the warlords fall, and many had listened to Dax's words in the council meetings. But the real test was now. Would they truly accept change? Would they believe that peace, unity, and understanding could replace the old ways of rule? Dax turned to her. "This is it," he said quietly. "The real work starts today." Silara nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. "We've come so far, but the people need to feel it. They need to believe it." A hush fell over the crowd as Dax stepped forward, raising his hand. The Void Mauler, now more a symbol of control than fear, stood silently behind him, its massive form watching over the gathering. "We stand at a crossroads," Dax began, his voice carrying across the square. "For too long, the Xyrithi Empire has ruled with an iron fist, conquering and controlling through fear. But today we begin a new chapter. A chapter where unity, understanding, and compassion are our strengths." The crowd was quiet, some unsure, others curious. Dax could see the uncertainty in their eyes. Change was hard, especially after so many years of tradition. But he knew this was the right path. The Xyrithi people could not continue to live in a cycle of destruction. They needed to evolve, to grow into something more. "We will not force our will upon others. We will listen to the voices of those who have been oppressed. We will seek solutions that benefit all, not just the powerful," Dax continued. "It will take time, but I believe in this empire. I believe in you." There was a long pause before the first voice rose from the crowd, a soft murmur that spread as people began to talk among themselves. Then, slowly, the applause started. It was quiet at first, but soon it grew into a roar of approval. It wasn't just about Dax's words. It was about the hope they represented. It was about the possibility of a future where the people were not ruled by fear, but by understanding. Silara felt a tear slip down her cheek. She hadn't expected the reaction to be so strong, so heartfelt. For the first time, she felt like she was truly part of something bigger than herself. Something better. As the applause echoed through the square, Dax turned to her, a smile on his face. "It's happening. They're starting to believe." Silara smiled back, her heart swelling with pride. "We've just taken the first step, but it's the most important one. This is how change happens." Dax nodded. "Together, we can create a future where strength isn't about dominating others. It's about protecting, supporting, and growing together." The crowd continued to cheer, and Dax looked out over them, feeling the weight of their expectations. He wasn't just a warrior now. He was a leader, a symbol of everything the Empire could become. The road ahead would be long, and the challenges would be great, but Dax Carter had no doubt in his heart. The Xyrithi Empire was changing. The galaxy was changing. And this time, the change was not one of violence or power. It was one of hope. And in that moment, Dax knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that the future of the Empire was bright.